I never thought a single text message could change the course of my entire life. It was just a quiet evening. Dinner at my son's home. The table was set, his wife had prepared the meal, and I remember thinking how grateful I was to spend time with them. We passed the dishes around, we talked about little things, and I smiled, believing it was going to be an ordinary night. But as I sat there cutting into my food, my phone buzzed. I glanced down expecting maybe a reminder or a message from a friend. Instead, what I saw made my stomach twist. The words were simple but terrifying. "Get up and go, now. Don't say anything to your son." For a moment, I froze. My son was sitting right across from me, his wife beside him. They were laughing, completely unaware. And there I was, gripping my phone so tightly I thought I might break it, my heart pounding loud enough for me to hear. I had no idea who sent that message, but something deep inside told me to listen. That decision, to quietly rise from my chair, to walk out without a word, would change everything I thought I knew about my own family. Because minutes later, the knock at their door wasn't mine. It was the police. The clinking of silverware against porcelain plates always carries a kind of warmth. That night, it carried something else, too. An echo of tension I couldn't quite name. Not then, at least. I walked into my son's home with a smile on my face, holding a small dessert I had baked, hoping to add something sweet to the evening. His wife greeted me at the door, her smile polite but fleeting, the kind of smile you offer out of duty rather than joy. I brushed it off, as I always did. "She's tired," I told myself. "She works hard, maybe she just wants the night to be over quickly." But in my chest, something didn't sit right. The air felt heavy, thick with unspoken words. The table was set beautifully, almost too beautifully. Candles flickered in the center, casting long shadows across the plates. The smell of roasted chicken and garlic butter filled the room, mixed with the faint sweetness of wine that had already been poured into tall glasses. It should have felt like home, but instead, I felt like a guest walking on fragile glass. I took my seat beside my son. He looked tired, though he tried to mask it with his usual easy grin. He leaned toward me, kissed my cheek, and said, "Glad you came, Mom." Those words meant more than he knew, because sometimes I wondered if my presence was truly wanted. Across from me sat his wife, her shoulders square, her eyes darting toward me and then away again. She asked if I needed anything, but the tone was sharp, clipped, as if she were already counting down the minutes until I left. I smiled, thanked her softly, and folded my napkin neatly into my lap. The meal began with small talk. My son asked about my week, and I told him about the garden I had been tending, how the tomatoes were finally ripe. He nodded, offered a half smile, but I noticed how his wife's lips tightened. She tapped her fork against her plate, an impatient rhythm as though every word I spoke was taking up air she didn't want me to breathe. It's strange, looking back now, how small things, tiny gestures, suddenly seem like warnings. At the time, I ignored them. I told myself I was being sensitive, that I was reading too much into the way her eyes rolled ever so slightly when I spoke, or how she whispered something to my son that made him shift uncomfortably in his chair. The food was delicious, though I barely tasted it. Every bite was flavored with a tension I couldn't name. The chicken was seasoned perfectly, the potatoes creamy and soft, but I felt a lump in my throat with every swallow. I forced myself to compliment the meal, telling my son's wife she had outdone herself. She smiled then, but it wasn't the kind of smile that warms a room. It was sharp, cutting, almost triumphant, like she had been waiting for me to acknowledge her effort just so she could feel superior. My son tried to keep the conversation alive. He asked about old family stories, about my childhood, even about his late father. For a moment, I thought maybe the night would soften, that laughter might fill the gaps. But every time he leaned toward me, his wife's eyes hardened. She sipped her wine slowly, deliberately, as though trying to swallow her resentment along with it. There was a moment, small but unforgettable. I reached for the bread basket, and she quickly pulled it closer to herself before passing it to me, almost like she was reluctant to share even something as simple as bread. My son noticed. I could tell by the way his eyes flickered between us, but he said nothing. Silence often speaks louder than words. I thought of all the times before when I had brushed off her coldness. The comments that cut just deep enough to sting, but not deep enough to confront. The way she corrected me in front of others. The way she sighed when I offered advice. The way she seemed to always want my son's attention only when it was directed at me. That night, it all seemed to hang in the air like smoke, impossible to ignore. As the meal went on, I noticed how carefully my son measured his words, how he seemed to balance between us like a man walking a tightrope. He would laugh at something I said, then quickly glance at his wife, as if to make sure she wasn't offended. He reached for her hand at one point, but she pulled it back, focusing on cutting her meat with slow, deliberate strokes. The candles flickered higher, their shadows stretching across the walls, and for the briefest moment, I felt like an outsider looking in. My son's home wasn't mine, it was theirs. And though my blood ran through his veins, it was her approval he seemed to chase. I remember setting my fork down, listening to the sound of their voices bouncing back and forth. They spoke about plans I wasn't included in, trips they wanted to take, renovations to the house, future goals. I smiled politely, nodding when appropriate, but inside, I felt the sting of being left out of the life I had once been the center of. Still, I told myself to be grateful. I told myself that family dinners were rare, that this was a gift, even if it came wrapped in discomfort. I thought of how my son had grown, of how I once cradled him in my arms, and I reminded myself that every mother must eventually step back, even if it hurts. But there was something else that night, a whisper inside me that I couldn't quite ignore. A subtle unease, like the room itself was warning me. The way the lights seemed too dim. The way the air seemed too still. The way my son's laughter sounded hollow. I excused myself briefly to the bathroom, splashing cool water on my face, staring at my reflection in the mirror. My eyes looked tired, older than I remembered. I asked myself if I was imagining it all. The tension, the coldness, the feeling that I was somehow intruding in a space that should have felt like home. I straightened my blouse, forced a smile back onto my face, and told myself to endure. For him. For my son. When I returned, the conversation had shifted to finances. I heard my daughter-in-law mention money in a way that made me uneasy. Her words were casual, but her tone was sharp, calculated. My son nodded along, his jaw tight, his fingers drumming against the table. They quickly changed the subject when they noticed me listening, but not before I caught the glance they exchanged. Quick, secretive, as though something unspoken lingered between them. The dinner carried on. Laughter came in brief, forced bursts. Silence filled the spaces between. I tried to ignore the knot tightening in my stomach, tried to focus on the flicker of the candles, on the smell of roasted chicken and garlic, on the sound of my son's voice. Looking back now, every small discomfort feels like a warning I should have heeded. The way his wife's smile never reached her eyes. The way my son's laughter seemed strained. The way the conversation danced around truths I wasn't allowed to hear. At the time, I convinced myself it was nothing. Just family. Just another dinner with its small tensions and unspoken words. But now, I know better. That night was not ordinary. It was the beginning of something I could never have imagined. And though I didn't yet understand it, the shadows in that dining room were already whispering the truth. The dinner had continued much the same way it started. Awkward laughter, clipped words, the feeling that I was walking on eggshells while pretending everything was fine. I had just taken another small bite of chicken, chewing slowly, my eyes fixed on the flickering candles in the center of the table, when I felt it. A faint buzz against the table. My phone, sitting face down beside my plate, trembled softly. At first I ignored it. I didn't want to be rude, not at the dinner table, not in front of my son, but something I can't explain, urged me to look. It wasn't the usual rhythm of messages from friends or reminders from my calendar. No, this vibration felt different. Urgent. I reached for it, almost casually, hoping not to draw attention. My son's wife glanced at me, her eyes narrowing slightly, as if she disapproved of me even daring to check my phone at her table. I gave her a faint smile, trying to seem harmless, as though I were only peeking at the time. I flipped the phone over, and in that moment, my world shifted. There it was, a message from an unknown number. Short, direct, and terrifying. Get up and go, now. Don't say anything to your son. The words burned into my eyes. My hands began to tremble so slightly that I pressed them into my lap to steady them. I read the message again, over and over, my mind racing. What did it mean? Who sent it? Why now, during dinner? I glanced up quickly. My son was talking about something mundane, his work maybe, or a project he was trying to finish. His wife nodded, her lips pressed tight as though she were listening intently. Neither of them seemed to notice that I had frozen in place. Inside, I was unraveling. My heart hammered against my ribs, each beat louder than the last. My mouth felt dry, though my glass of water sat only inches away. I wanted to reach for it, but I was terrified my hand would shake so much that the glass would rattle, giving me away. Get up and go, now. Don't say anything to your son. The message repeated itself in my head like a siren. Why shouldn't I say anything to my son? Why not him? My instinct was always to trust him, to protect him, to believe in him. But here I was, clutching a warning that seemed to suggest he was the very one I couldn't confide in. I tried to steady my breathing, tried to appear calm. My son looked at me and asked if everything was all right. His voice was gentle, but there was something in his eyes. Something tired, something uneasy. I forced a smile. Oh, just a reminder about my garden, I whispered, sliding the phone face down again. But even as the words left my lips, guilt churned in my stomach. I had lied to my son. Lied to his face. And worse, I had no idea why. But the message... Oh, the message. It rang inside my mind like church bells, impossible to silence. What if it was a scam? What if it was a cruel prank? What if I stood up and left only to humiliate myself for believing in nonsense? And yet another thought crept in, slowly, heavily, like a shadow stretching across the floor. What if it wasn't nonsense? What if it was real? What if my life depended on obeying those words? I watched my son and his wife as they laughed softly together. From the outside, they seemed like any young couple enjoying dinner. But now, I couldn't stop analyzing every glance, every twitch, every word. Did my son know? Was he hiding something from me? Was she? I reached for my napkin, dabbing at the corners of my mouth to hide the way my lips had gone dry. My fork clinked softly against my plate as I set it down. I needed time to think. But time was slipping through my fingers, every second louder, every heartbeat stronger. I slid my phone into my lap, shielding the screen under the tablecloth. My fingers tapped the screen again, checking for another message, some kind of follow-up. Nothing. Just the single, chilling instruction. Get up and go, now. Don't say anything to your son. I wanted to ask, who are you? Why are you telling me this? But I knew deep down that typing even a single word would draw attention. My son's wife was watching me too closely. Her eyes flickered to me every few minutes, sharp and assessing, like she was waiting for me to make a mistake. I felt the room growing smaller, as if the walls themselves were closing in. My ears rang with the sound of silence, broken only by the occasional clink of silverware. I knew I had to make a decision. Stay, and risk whatever danger the message hinted at. Or leave, and risk never knowing the truth. My hand rested on the edge of the table, fingers gripping the wood until my knuckles turned white. I thought of my son. My little boy who once clung to my hand when he crossed the street, who once cried into my shoulder when nightmares woke him. Could I really walk away from him now, without explanation? Could I abandon him? But then I thought of the message again. Don't say anything to your son. The words pulsed in my head like a heartbeat. Whoever sent that warning knew something I didn't. Something dangerous. I looked at my son one last time. His smile seemed softer now, almost distracted, like he was hiding a weight he wouldn't share with me. And then I looked at his wife. Her eyes caught mine, and for a moment, I swore I saw something there. A glint. Not warmth, not kindness, but something sharp, something cold. I made my choice. Slowly, carefully, I picked up my napkin and placed it on the table. I muttered something about needing to stretch my legs, about checking on the dessert I had brought. My voice cracked slightly, but I masked it with a cough. My chair scraped softly against the floor as I stood. My knees felt weak, but I forced them to carry me toward the hallway. I could feel their eyes on my back. My son's concerned, his wife's suspicious. Each step was agony, every movement a test of will. I wanted to turn back, to say something, to explain myself. But the warning echoed in my mind. Don't say anything to your son. So I didn't. I walked out in silence. When I reached the front door, my hands fumbled with my purse, my keys, anything to delay the moment. I half expected them to stop me, to demand to know where I was going. But behind me, the conversation at the table started again, low and muffled, as though nothing had happened. I slipped outside into the cool night air. The silence of the street pressed against me, broken only by the faint chirping of crickets. My heart still thundered, my palms still damp with sweat. I didn't know why I was leaving. I didn't know who had warned me. But I knew this much. Something terrible was about to happen, and I was no longer inside to face it. When I rose from my chair, I swear my legs almost gave out from under me. The scrape of the wooden chair against the floor seemed louder than thunder in that dining room, though I tried to keep it steady, gentle, unnoticeable. My son's head turned toward me instantly. His fork paused halfway to his mouth. His wife's eyes darted toward me too, sharper, narrower, calculating. I couldn't let them see the fear in me. I forced a smile, thin, strained, but I hoped convincing enough. I'll just check on the dessert I brought, I murmured. My voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. Light, harmless, casual. My son nodded, already half distracted by whatever story he had been telling. But his wife? Her gaze lingered on me a moment too long. She didn't say anything, but I felt her suspicion like a knife pressing against the back of my neck. I folded my napkin carefully and set it beside my plate, pretending not to notice how her eyes tracked my every move. My hands were trembling, so I gripped the napkin tighter than I needed to, hoping the fabric would hide the shaking. I walked slowly toward the hallway, not too fast, not too slow. Each step felt rehearsed, like I was playing a role on a stage, terrified that one wrong move would break the illusion. My heart thumped louder than the clicking of my heels against the hardwood floor. When I reached the corner, out of their sight, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My chest rose and fell in shallow gasps, but I forced myself to stay calm. I told myself, just keep moving, don't turn back. Don't let them see you falter. The front door loomed ahead, only a few feet away, but it felt like a mile. My hands twitched as I reached for my purse hanging on the coat rack, trying to keep the movement silent, effortless, like it was part of my plan all along. I fumbled with my car keys, the metal jingling far too loud in the stillness of the hallway. I froze, waiting, terrified that they had heard. For a moment, I thought I'd hear footsteps behind me, my son calling out, "Mom, where are you going?" But there was nothing. Only the faint murmur of their voices from the dining room, carrying on as if I had never left. I turned the doorknob slowly, painfully slowly, so it wouldn't creak. The door opened with a soft sigh, and the cool night air rushed in to greet me. I stepped outside, pulling the door shut behind me until only the faintest click sealed it closed. And then, I was alone. The silence of the night pressed in on me, broken only by the chirp of crickets and the distant hum of traffic. The stars blinked faintly overhead, indifferent to the storm brewing in my chest. I hurried to my car, my steps quickening now that I was off the stage. My hands shook as I unlocked the door and slid inside, pulling it shut with a muted thud. The faint scent of old leather and lavender air freshener surrounded me, familiar yet strangely foreign in that moment. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, my knuckles white. My breathing came in uneven bursts, each inhale sharp, each exhale shaky. My phone sat heavy in my lap, that single message glowing in my memory like a brand. Get up and go, now. Don't say anything to your son. I whispered the words to myself, as though repeating them would make them make sense. But they didn't. Nothing made sense. I glanced back at the house, its windows glowing warmly against the dark night. From here, it looked so ordinary, so peaceful. You would never know what lay inside, or what secret danger had prompted that message. Guilt began to creep in, slow and suffocating. My son was still in there, laughing, talking, carrying on with his wife. And I had left him. I had obeyed a stranger's warning and walked away, without explanation, without a word. The thought pierced me deeper than any knife. What kind of mother leaves her child behind? Even if he was grown, even if he had a wife of his own, he was still mine. And yet, I had left. I sat in the car, torn between turning the key in the ignition and driving away, or rushing back inside and demanding answers. But I couldn't move. My body was frozen, paralyzed by the war raging inside me. Confusion twisted in my mind. Who had sent that message? Why target me? Why during dinner? Was it about my son? His wife? Both of them? Or was it me? Was I the one in danger? Every possible answer only birthed more questions, each more terrifying than the last. I stared at the front door, half expecting it to burst open at any moment, my son rushing out, demanding to know why I'd left. But it stayed shut. The house remained calm, serene, mocking my turmoil with its quietness. Minutes crawled by, each one heavier than the last. I shifted in my seat, my breath fogging the window as I leaned closer to get a better view. Shadows moved faintly inside the dining room, their figures crossing past the window now and again. They looked so normal, so unaware of the storm building just beyond their walls. The guilt gnawed at me. The confusion drowned me. But underneath it all, one thing grew stronger than the rest: fear. My phone buzzed again, and my heart leapt into my throat. I scrambled to pick it up, my fingers fumbling with the screen. But when I checked, nothing. Just a notification from some app. Not another warning, not the explanation I so desperately craved. I let out a shaky laugh, half relief, half despair. My hands trembled so badly I set the phone down on the passenger seat, afraid I'd drop it. I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel, closing my eyes, trying to steady myself. But every time I did, I saw the words again. Get up and go, now. Don't say anything to your son. The command felt etched into my bones, impossible to erase. I lifted my head and forced myself to keep watching the house. If something was going to happen, I needed to be ready. I needed to see it with my own eyes to understand why I had been warned. The minutes stretched into eternity. My body ached from sitting so rigidly, my mind screaming for answers I didn't have. I felt like a ghost, hovering on the edge of my own family, unseen, unheard, yet bound to them by invisible chains. Every flicker of movement inside the house made my pulse race. Every sound outside made me flinch. The night was alive with uncertainty, and I was its captive. I thought of getting out of the car, of walking back up to the house and pretending I had just stepped outside for air. But I knew I couldn't. If the message was true, if it was a warning of something real, then going back could cost me everything. So I stayed. I sat in that car, staring at the glowing windows of the home I once thought was safe. My hands clutched the steering wheel, my eyes never leaving the front door. I waited. I listened. I braced myself. Because deep down, I knew something was coming, and I had to be ready. The night outside my son's house had grown still. Too still. I sat in my car with the engine off, staring at the glowing windows, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my fingers ached. I kept telling myself that maybe nothing would happen, that maybe the message had been a cruel joke or some mistake. But then I heard it. At first it was faint, a low hum in the distance carried on the night air. My heart stuttered in my chest. The hum grew louder, turning into the unmistakable wail of sirens. My breath caught. Red and blue lights suddenly painted the street, splashing across the walls of my son's home, flickering through the curtains like a warning. Police cars, one after another, screeched to a stop right in front of his driveway. The sudden burst of noise shattered the silence. I froze, my entire body rigid. Doors flew open. Heavy boots pounded against the pavement. Officers spilled out of their vehicles, their radios crackling, their voices sharp and commanding. The beams of their flashlights cut through the night, landing on the very house where I had just been sitting minutes ago. My son's house. I sank lower into my seat, my heart hammering so violently, I thought it might tear through my chest. This wasn't some prank. This wasn't a mistake. This was real. The first knock came loud and forceful, 3 heavy pounds against the front door, the kind of knock that makes your blood run cold. "Police! Open up!" one of them shouted, his voice booming through the quiet neighborhood. I clapped a hand over my mouth, stifling a gasp. My eyes darted between the front door and the glowing windows, waiting for movement inside. Seconds dragged by like hours. Then I saw a shadow pass across the dining room window. My son. He opened the door. From where I sat, I couldn't hear everything, but I could see the way his body tensed, the way his head jerked slightly back in surprise. 2 officers stepped forward, their flashlights glinting off their badges. Behind them, more officers fanned out, surrounding the house. My son's wife appeared behind him, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Even from a distance, I could see her expression. Tight, cold, unyielding. She whispered something to him, her lips moving quickly, urgently. He shook his head, his shoulders stiffening as the officers began to step inside. My stomach twisted. I wanted to get out of the car, to run up there, to demand answers. But I couldn't move. My legs wouldn't listen. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter, anchoring me in place. The voices grew louder now, carrying through the night air. I couldn't make out every word, but I heard enough. "Search warrant. Step aside. Stay where you are." My son's voice rose, strained, defensive. His wife's voice cut through, sharper, angrier, spitting words I couldn't hear clearly. Chaos erupted inside. The muffled sounds of footsteps, furniture scraping, doors opening and slamming. The officers were moving through the house, their flashlights sweeping across the windows, their shadows darting across the walls. I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel, my eyes squeezed shut. I felt like I was suffocating, torn between the instinct to run and the desperate need to stay. And then, shouts, clear, commanding. "Hands where we can see them. Stay down." My head shot up, my breath catching in my throat. Through the front window, I caught a glimpse of my son being pushed back, his hands raised, his face pale with shock. His wife stood beside him, her mouth open in protest, her fists clenched at her sides. It felt like the world was crumbling beneath me. Not my son, not my boy. Surely there was some mistake. But no, the officers weren't here by accident. They weren't knocking on the wrong door. They were here for him. For them. Tears burned in my eyes as I watched the scene unfold. My son's voice cracked as he shouted something, his words lost in the commotion. His wife pulled at his arm, her face twisted with rage. An officer stepped forward, blocking them from moving. I wanted to scream, to burst out of the car and shout, "That's my son! He's a good man. There must be some mistake." But I couldn't. My body refused to move. My voice locked tight in my throat. The lights from the police cars kept flashing, painting everything in frantic red and blue. Neighbors began peeking out from their houses, curious, whispering. The whole street was watching, and there I sat in the shadows, helpless. The sound of handcuffs clicking shut rang through the night, sharp and final. I gasped. Through the window, I saw my son's hands pulled behind his back. The officer's grip was firm, unyielding. His wife screamed something then, her body thrashing as two other officers restrained her. My chest tightened, a sob clawing its way up my throat. I pressed my hand against the glass, as if somehow that thin barrier between me and them could make a difference. This couldn't be real. Not my son, not the little boy I had raised, the one who once held my hand crossing the street, the one who promised to always protect me. But it was real. The truth crashed down on me with the weight of 1,000 stones. My son and his wife weren't bystanders in this chaos. They weren't innocent people caught up in someone else's mistake. They were at the center of it all. I felt my heart shatter as I watched them being led out of the house. The front door swung wide open, spilling light into the night. My son stumbled slightly as the officer guided him forward, the cold steel of the cuffs glinting in the flashing lights. His wife followed, her face twisted with fury, her wrists bound as she shouted curses into the night. Neighbors gasped. Whispers carried across the street. People who had once waved to my son in greeting now stood with wide eyes, watching him dragged away like a criminal. And me? I stayed hidden. I sat in my car, my face wet with silent tears, my hands trembling violently against the steering wheel. Helpless. Safe, yes, but helpless. I wanted to reach out, to scream his name, to tell him I was there, but I couldn't. The warning echoed in my mind, louder than ever. Don't say anything to your son. So I stayed silent. I watched the flashing lights swirl, watched the officers push them into separate police cars, watched the doors slam shut. The engines roared to life, the sirens wailed once more, and then, just like that, they were gone. The street fell silent again, but the silence was heavier than ever. I sat there in the dark, staring at the empty house, my chest hollow, my world forever changed. I sat in my car long after the sirens faded into the night, staring at the empty house that still glowed faintly from the lights inside. My hands trembled on the steering wheel, and the air felt heavy in my lungs, like I couldn't breathe enough to stay alive. My son, my only child, had been led away in handcuffs. His wife, too. I whispered to myself over and over, like a prayer I didn't believe in. There has to be a mistake. There has to be a mistake. But in my heart, I already knew. This was no mistake. The silence was suffocating. My phone sat on the passenger seat, the same phone that had buzzed during dinner with that terrifying message. I picked it up with shaking hands, staring at the dark screen. That single text had saved me, but it had also shattered me. Who sent it? Why me? What had I just escaped? The question spun in my head until I thought I'd lose my mind. I couldn't stay there anymore. With a heavy heart, I turned the key, the engine rumbling to life, and slowly drove away from the house that no longer felt like my son's home. The next morning, I didn't have to wait long for answers. The news was everywhere. Local stations ran the story with flashing headlines, reporters standing in front of police precincts, talking about arrests that had shocked the community. Photos of my son's house appeared on the screen, red and blue lights still illuminating the night behind them. And then, his name. My son's name. Hearing it made me sick. My knees buckled, and I sank into a chair, Clutching the remote with a trembling hand as the anchor spoke, authorities confirmed the arrest of son's full name and his wife's full name, following an ongoing investigation into fraudulent financial activities, suspected money laundering, and alleged connections to dangerous individuals. Police warned that the case involves millions of dollars and potential ties to organized crime. Further details remain under investigation. My heart dropped into my stomach. Fraud, money laundering, organized crime. I couldn't process the words. It felt like I was watching someone else's life unravel, not mine, not my son's. But it didn't stop there. As reporters dug deeper, more details came to light. Their so-called business trips had been covers for meetings with criminals. The luxury purchases I'd once thought were just careless spending, they were tied to stolen money. My daughter-in-law's smug smiles, her cutting remarks, her disdain for me, it all began to make sense in a horrifying way. And then, the truth about the text message came. The police revealed that a cooperating witness, someone who had been close to my son and his wife's operations, had been feeding them information for weeks. That night, when the police prepared to raid the house, the witness realized I was inside. They sent me that text to get me out before everything went down. I shivered as I thought about it. If I had stayed, if I had ignored the warning, I would have been inside when the officers stormed the house. I would have been pulled into the chaos, maybe even suspected of being involved. At best, I would have been humiliated, dragged out in front of neighbors, cameras rolling, my face plastered across the news as the mother of a criminal. At worst, who knows what kind of danger my son and his wife had invited into that home. The thought made me nauseous. Someone had saved me. A stranger. A witness who knew the storm that was coming. And my own son? He hadn't said a word. He hadn't warned me. He hadn't protected me. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife ever could. I sat alone in my living room, staring at old photographs. My son as a baby, wrapped in a blue blanket, sleeping peacefully in my arms. My son as a boy, missing a front tooth, holding up his first soccer trophy with the proudest grin I'd ever seen. My son on his wedding day, standing tall and smiling, promising a bright future beside the woman who would later drag him into darkness. Tears blurred my vision. How had it come to this? How had my little boy, the one who once begged me to read him one more bedtime story, become the man I saw on the news? Arrested, accused, exposed. Every memory felt poisoned now, tainted by the truth I couldn't ignore. I thought back to dinner that night, to the strange tension I had brushed aside. His wife's clipped tone, her sharp eyes watching me too closely. My son's forced smile, the way he kept glancing at his phone like he was waiting for something. All those little things I'd dismissed as nothing. They were signs, warnings, and I had missed them. The guilt crushed me. In the days that followed, I avoided the outside world. I didn't want to face the neighbors, the whispers, the pitying looks. I didn't answer the phone when reporters called, or when curious acquaintances reached out under the pretense of checking on me. I hid. But I couldn't hide from my own thoughts. The truth was a constant companion, whispering in the quiet of the night. Your son is not the man you thought he was. He chose this path. He chose lies. He chose crime. And yet, he was still my son. That was the cruelest part of it all, because no matter what he had done, no matter how deep his betrayal cut, a part of me still loved him. A part of me still remembered rocking him to sleep, still heard the sound of his childish laughter, still felt the warmth of his tiny hand in mine. But love wasn't enough to erase reality. He had betrayed me. He had lied to me. He had brought me into his home, sat me at his table, and let me sit inches away from disaster without a word of warning. He had put me in danger. And that was something I could never forgive. Weeks later, I gathered the strength to visit the police station. I needed answers. Closure. An officer explained to me what had really been going on, how my son and his wife had been under investigation for months, how they had funneled money through fake businesses, how they had ties to people who wouldn't have hesitated to hurt anyone who got in their way. And then the officer looked me in the eye and said, "Ma'am, if you hadn't left when you did, you could have been caught in the middle of it." Or worse. Worse. That word echoed in my mind long after I left the station. I realized then that the message on my phone hadn't just saved me from humiliation. It had saved my life. The heartbreak never really leaves you. It lingers, like a shadow you can't outrun. I walk through my home now, and every corner reminds me of him. The couch where he used to nap, the kitchen where he used to sneak cookies, the backyard where he learned to ride his bike. But now those memories are mixed with something darker. A betrayal I'll never fully understand. I ask myself every night, did I fail him as a mother? Did I miss the signs for too long? Could I have saved him from this path? I don't know the answers. I may never know. All I know is that the boy I raised is gone. The man who remains is a stranger, and I am left with nothing but the truth. The truth that he lied. The truth that he betrayed me. The truth that I escaped something far worse than I will ever know. I survived. But a part of me died that night too. When I look back on that night, I realize how fragile trust really is. One moment, I was sitting at a dinner table with my son, believing I was safe, believing family meant protection. The next, I was running from the very people I loved the most. That message saved me. But it also opened my eyes. If I had ignored my instincts, if I had brushed it off as nothing, I might not be here to tell this story. I learned that sometimes survival means listening to the quiet voice inside you, the one that tells you to move, even when your heart begs you to stay. I won't pretend this hasn't broken me. To discover that my own son could betray me so deeply is a pain I can't put into words. Love doesn't just disappear, but it changes. It becomes a scar you carry, a reminder of how close you came to losing everything. So I say this to you, the ones listening, never ignore the signs. Never silence your instincts. Because sometimes, the people closest to us hold the darkest secrets.